Welcome, everybody. This is Illiterate. My name is Evan.
My name is Taylor. I read a book this week.
I watched a movie. This week we are covering I'm Thinking of Ending Things. The new film by Charlie Kaufman, the acclaimed writer-director. This just came out on Netflix, and it's open to swell reviews. It was in the Netflix top 10. Charlie Kaufman is going to be a big subject today. You might recognize some titles such as Being John Malkovich, Adaptation with Nick Cage, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind with Jim Carrey, Anomalisa, Synecdoche, New York. Those are the big ones. This is going to be a bit of a thick one in terms of maybe some spoilers. This is hard to speak about because of the abstract nature.
Some might say he's known for his weirdness, but it's more surrealness, and we'll get into all of that. But it is, a lot of his stuff is open to multiple interpretations and things like that. And that's what most people are covering when it comes to this movie. So we might dip our toes into that.
Real quick, I'm thinking of ending things. Nothing is as it seems as a young woman travels with her new boyfriend to his parents' secluded farm. Upon arriving, she comes to question everything she thought she knew about him and herself. So this is a bit of a Rubik's Cube of a film. It cuts back and forth between two main timelines. This couple, as I said, visiting his parents, and this janitor walking through the halls of a deserted high school.
And how does it all intermingle?
And you get the sense very quickly that it's all connected. And you want to figure out what every piece of it means going along. So it's quite engaging. And you could say it's overwhelming. It would be excruciating to not know what you were walking into for this. I would say if you've never seen, if you're not familiar with Charlie Kaufman's work, or if you're not ready to, really walk yourself back about what a movie can be like, this could be kind of abrasive. So, yeah.
The interesting thing with Charlie Kaufman, so like we said, he's known for writing these artistic, non-commercially viable, very existential pieces.
Heady, yeah, very.
For example, he's only adapted one other thing. Everything else is his own creation. And the thing that he adapted, Evan mentioned already, is called Adaptation, but it is an absolute mess of an adaptation in a good way, in the sense that he goes completely off the rails. And instead of it being an adaptation of the book, it's about him trying to adapt this book that he can't adapt.
He goes into the movie. There's other versions of him. I actually really love that movie. I saw it just a few years ago, and I really, really adore it. That movie I thought was really, in a lot of ways, light and engaging in a really fast-paced kind of way. It had a lot of humor.
And that might be
bit more. Yeah, this is a bit more dark. This edges on walking up to the door of thriller at moments. It feels like it's about to become like some sort of shock scare, but it never actually does get to that point. It just is really successful at evoking that paranoia for just a few key moments.
So Charlie Kaufman is known for that sort of surrealist thing. So I figured we'd start talking about him and then how he got to this thing and who the author is and how they collaborate on something like this, since he is so uniquely identified. Other surrealist stuff, we talked about it last week, Philip K. Dick. Charlie Kaufman has cited as an influence. A lot of people would compare their stuff, as well as Franz Kafka, who did the Metamorphosis, David Lynch in terms of film, all living in that sort of sphere.
Yes, very much. Especially in Being John Malkovich. That's as far as like going back to Philip K. Dick, we mentioned that last week. So much about that is questioning your identity, yourself. There's so much of Philip K. Dick themes that I see running through Being John Malkovich. It's really fascinating stuff.
And it's usually twisty-turny when it comes to the plot, and maybe even nonsensical, it might seem on the outset, because it's not so much, and this is hard for modern audiences to grapple with, it's not about solving the plot like a puzzle or this twist at the end, and it's like, oh, now it all makes sense. It's more about taking in the piece as a whole. So while Kafka, which he would be most compared to, is more of the social bureaucracy, questioning those things, Kaufman is more of the existential human individual. Why am I here? Which kind of ties into Philip K. Dick's stuff as well. Right. So let's go into where in the world he came from, because I find that's often interesting when it comes to these artists, especially ones that are trying to do something very different, and it gives hope to us all if we are trying to break the mold. So he did drama in high school, went to NYU to study film. Among one of his classmates I found at NYU is Chris Columbus, who we talked about in our Harry Potter episode.
No way, yes.
The director, yeah. And Kaufman has been writing scripts and plays and sending them out to unsolicited people, which you're not supposed to do in the film world, but he's always writing these things. Although he's mentioned, and we often talk about influences and encouragement, he said he got one response from Alan Arkin, who he sent a script to, and he had sent back, obviously not interested, but a very lovely and encouraging letter, and that sort of kept spurring him on to send out these things and to try and make something. And a lot of the stuff he's doing at this point is very much comedy, and you can feel that more so in his earlier works, a lighter levity to what he's doing. At this point, though, he's not in LA, not in New York either. He ends up working in Minneapolis at the newspaper for 5 years, and he's still trying to write these scripts on spec. And he decides, you know what, I'm going to make the jump. In 1991, he moves to LA and tries to get work. But the only place he gets is this Comedy Central show, and it's about like public access TV. And coincidentally enough, it's in Minneapolis that the job is. So he's like, oh God, I have to go back to Minneapolis.
Logging right back.
At the last second, he gets a call to write on this show, Get a Life, which is on Fox. And so he's able to stay. But it's like, if he had accepted that, it's like he said, I would never have gone back to LA. Like I would have just kept doing what I was doing. It seemed like my life was in Minneapolis. But because of that, he stayed. He ended up writing 30 episodes of random different TV shows through the 90s, all the time writing pilots and scripts that end up being rejected. So he has this whole body of work that has never been made and won't be seen as far as trying to get something out there for TV and
fascinating,
film.
yeah.
And then a movie you mentioned, being John Malkovich, he wrote in 1994, and nothing came of it until 1997. And now at this point, he's 39 years old. John Malkovich saw it, and it's hard to explain the premise of it, but it's about this puppeteer who finds this portal into the mind of John Malkovich, and you can control him. A million other things happen, but it's very bizarre. And it's the fact that he had written it specifically about John Malkovich, and John Malkovich loved it. And it's like, well, this is, that's as far as it went there for a couple of years. Nothing happened with it because you've got to get all these people involved. Producers were too scared to take it on. But it's interesting that John Malkovich was, because it's like, if this is terrible, then it's my name on the title and I'm the main person. But if it's great, it's a genius move by me as an actor to choose this. REM's company, the band, their company bought it. And that's how they got Spike Jonze on to direct. I was going to
say, this is Spike Jonze' directorial debut, if I'm not mistaken.
As well.
He's perfect too because he's so fantastical as well, and this is his really just his burgeoning out. This is such a beautiful crossroad here. All these forces coming together on such a wild, just an amazing idea. This is also one that is a bit more comedic. I mean, it's just silly. I mean, seriously, somebody pushes a file cabinet against a wall out of the way, and there's just this tube that leads you down and to the eyes. You're seeing through the eyes of John Malkovich, like you go down a slide. I mean, it's just bizarre. And if people really found that, what would they do with it? And it's so fascinating. It's such a trip.
Surreal. Yeah. And it does make sense then looking at Charlie Kaufman's previous history. He's been trying to write, and he writes comedy, and he's written comedy plays, and he's written comedy TV. It's like he has that more of that mindset to it.
Yeah.
So then that happens. He gets more interest in Hollywood. The next thing he comes out with is Adaptation, which is Spike Jonze again. And like we said, it's this bizarre thing where he got the book, The Orchid Thief, which is a nonfiction story by this gal, Susan Orlean, and he is trying to adapt it. And then the story he comes up with is, instead of it being about the thing that he's trying to adapt, it's about him trying to adapt the thing. He comes up with his
about him breaking his mental breakdown as he cannot bring himself to adapt this book that he just seems to be disinterested in.
He comes up with a fake brother who is also credited on the screenplay, who appears as Nicolas Cage through technical wizardry twice in the film. Like it's him Nicolas Cage sitting next to Nicolas Cage. Goes off the rails into this crazy ending, because I guess the whole thing is that he wants to not have it be like a Hollywood movie. That's why he's struggling with adapting something. And then
I'm glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that. Is the railing against wanting it to be normal, so typical. And that's what I find so interesting about his work time and time again, is he's really trying to find a different way to make it engaging. The way he presents things, the way he tries to show you, it's really an experience. Every scene nearly is an experience, almost in just a different level.
Well, for example, one of the scenes in Adaptation, he is on the set with his fake brother of being John Malkovich. So there's all these actors and directors that came back to be in the scene that they were filming. And so you get so confused. Actually, him and his fake brother were nominated for the Oscar. They didn't win. But it just, people got so confused about, like, who is Charlie Kaufman? Does he have a brother? What was the movie that he made before? Was this made while they were filming Being John Malkovich? Just
beautiful. I'm kissing my
beautiful. Just this meta narrative of insanity. So that got him even more publicity now. And it's weird because it was hard to make. He had to get all the actors on board even for this, because like we said, it is pushing.
I mean, it's just, it seems like a beautiful nexus, Being John Malkovich, being able to bring all those types of talent together for this. I mean, that just alone should be a great vote of confidence going into something like Adaptation, but Adaptation on its own then is so bizarre. Just a writer breaking down, relenting, not wanting to write this movie, and somehow he becomes the movie.
That's I was watching a lot of interviews with Charlie Kaufman, and it's like it's not one of those people where it's like, oh, I just sit down and get blast out 6,000 words. It's like, no, he enjoys it. He's not saying I don't enjoy it, but he acknowledges that it is a difficult thing.
Easy,
which I appreciate. So the next thing he did is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which won the Oscar. Moves on to direct now. So he wrote and directed Synecdoche, New York, which did horribly in the box office, but is critically revered as one of the most amazing things. But it is
hailed,
a heavy. It's probably the last thing you should watch of his, because it is the most abstract and perhaps not even entertaining, but the thematics and the symbolism.
Right. I have not tried to watch that one, but you say you have actually.
I tried, and then it was just I went to YouTube, and there's this guy, I'll post links, but he has done like a 5-hour analysis, minute by minute, of all the different things that it's referencing and all of the different allusions. So it's just crazy. So
that day I absolutely will. Just got to be ready.
Yeah. that maybe even now deviated him more so from the Hollywood sphere, because he wrote a musical comedy called Frank or Francis, and it's about movie critics, which is interesting. And the finances fell through. It had a ton of people on it. Jack Black was in it, just lots and lots of people, but they still couldn't get the final $10 million.
Wow.
Many other feature scripts as well that were written but not produced. One of which I thought was interesting. He had written an adaptation of A Scanner Darkly, which is the Philip K. Dick thing. But then Linklater obviously got it and wrote his own script. So, but I found a link. You can read the Charlie Kaufman version of A Scanner Darkly.
Well, there you go. I mean, the Philip K. Dick thing is no coincidence. Then he's aware. Absolutely,
he's vibing with it.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So, like, all that to say, all of this time after Synecdoche, New York, just tons and tons of things that he's still writing. Nothing's happening. He wrote a play that was made called Anomalisa. And 2015, his friend Dino, who's a producer, wanted to make it into a stop motion film. So that one was actually crowdfunded.
I didn't know. I actually didn't know any of this. I had no idea that it was a pre-existing material. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was a play that he wrote. So like I said, he's constantly writing and doing all this stuff, but it just is hard in the Hollywood sphere. So this I'm Thinking of Ending Things is his first new movie in 5 years, because that one came out in 2015.
Right.
So that's why it's such a big deal, because he is so prolific but not made, I guess.
Right. And his first adaptation since making Adaptation.
Right.
So how is he actually going to go now and try to make an actually faithful to, I mean.
Yeah, so how did this get chosen then, if it is 5 years in between, and he is very selective and he's jaded by this, maybe he's not jaded by
and then
the
he
system,
ends up doing an adaptation. Yeah.
Let's talk about the author, Iain Reid, Canadian writer, Kingston, Ontario is where he lives. The book came out in 2016, and this is his first novel, which is also wild.
Wow.
He was 35 years old when it came out. He has actually written, people get this wrong, I see it all online, that this is not his first book. It is his first novel. So he had written 2 other books before. They're 2 memoirs, and I'll just read you the titles. One of them is called One Bird's Choice, A Year in the Life of an Overeducated, Underemployed 20-something Who Moves Back Home, which came out in 2010. And then his other book was The Truth About Luck, What I Learned on My Road Trip with Grandma. So you can tell both of these are very light, fun, happy pieces. And so right around the time,
not too much pretense to it anyway.
Right.
That seems pretty. I'm silly, in a way,
or something you write in your 20s about, haha, I'm just working my way through life. What am I learning? What do I know?
Trying to own it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So right around the second, the time the second memoir is coming out, his agent asks him, well, what's next? And he says, I have this idea for a story. It's pretty disturbing, and it's a novel. And again, what I love about this is she encouraged him right away. Keep going. Cool. Do it.
Oh, man. Yeah.
And so that compels him then in 3 years to come up with this thing.
Wow.
And the book itself, in terms of the positive sides, he was like, I was thinking about a lot of the people in my life who bring meaning to it, and that counters some of the darker elements of the story. So it was still coming from a place of gratitude as opposed to a nihilistic place, which I thought was interesting, which we can see with Charlie Kaufman too. He also is questioning these things, but he doesn't hate everything or has a vendetta against people. The other thing that's cool about the book is it's super short for these kinds of things. And he admits to wanting to do this in this way. He's like, I know people are busy, and hopefully you could read it in 1 or 2 sittings. It's weird. He thinks that like movies, you sit down and watch, but a book you read over the course of 4 weeks. He's like, I wanted something that just moved and you could go along with it.
Very cool.
And then, and it's not even, he says, like, it's not a horror thriller. Kind of, you can see how the pieces are coming together with Charlie Kaufman. It's more of a literary novel. It's unsettling and philosophical. And a lot of what the book is internal, the girl's thoughts. And so he's like, how is this ever going to become? He never even thought it would become a film. That's not even
so
in his
antithetical
radar.
to a movie and to a screenplay. Is you can't convey thought. That is the magic trick. If you're going to do that, like, well, how are you going to visually represent it and weave it in auditorially? And that's why it takes like somebody like Charlie Kaufman who's always trying to make the mundane almost engaging. That's actually a trick that's interesting to pull off. How does he do it, and what kind of pieces does he actually use to construct it?
Yeah, so here's how it got made then. So Iain's side, shortly after the book came out, agents talked to him. They said, well, we should shop this around as a film. But yeah, like we said, it's a literary philosophic thing with some tense moments, but it's not what he thinks Hollywood is looking for. So some producers and people were interested because it had gained some clout. But Reid had said that it felt disingenuous because he had said in these interviews, it was always a bunch of people on the call and it seemed like they hadn't read it, or that these producers, they just wanted to be the ones to get it, to do something with it later, or figure out how can we make this into a horror film. And he's like, it isn't any of that stuff. So then he gets the message from his agent saying, would you have time next week to talk to Charlie Kaufman? And he says he looked down at his little calendar desk and it's just completely blank. And he's like, yeah, I could probably manage that. He knows
smooth,
Charlie.
walking off.
Well, that's what you got to do when you're just starting out. You got nothing. You're like, well, let me see. You're flipping through a blank calendar.
I can't cancel that. Yeah, maybe Thursday 3.
Yeah, because you got to pick a time that normal people would be calling. Yeah. Now on Charlie's side of things, Charlie's just checking things out online. He goes on Amazon.com. Remember, this is 2016. Amazon had recommended it to him based on his previous history. So this is a case where the algorithm prevails. Makes sense that on Charlie Kaufman's Amazon account, they would think, well, you might like this. So
Amazon got this movie made.
So Charlie Kaufman bought it, read it, and then called his agent, hey, has anybody gotten the rights to this yet? And then that's how he gets in. So completely unaware that Reid's agent is putting this out to people, he came to it of his own volition via the Amazon algorithm, which told him, hey, you might like this. And the reason that he wanted to do it, maybe you've already made it clear, but it's the dream logic of it all. But then the other thing, now we know, he said, Charlie admits to this. He's like, it was contained. It's small. There are really like 4 characters. There's only a few locations. Most of it's in either a car, the house, or the high school. And so this seemed like I could definitely get financing for this, which is his main concern. But it's also kind of sad, but it's true. He's like, well, I'm not going to make something and go through all this stuff that I've been going through my whole career, basically. So it's that initial call that makes it all happen. And you can really see, well, they are very much in line with, we want to do something a little bit outside the mainstream. It gets popularity, but it's labeled wrong. So they end up meeting in person in Reykjavik, Iceland, at Iain's guest house.
What?
And I'll explain, and this was me going on a rabbit hole of research.
Please.
But here's the side note. So Ian's sister, Eliza, is the first lady of Iceland. And here's how that happened. The guy who wrote the book, his sister is the first lady of Iceland. So she had been living there for over a decade, and her husband was a historian at the University of Iceland. There was public demand that he might run for
king.
No, not since the 40s. There was public demand that he might run for president. So they said, why not? And he won. So her husband becomes the president of Iceland. They actually had, because it's 4-year term. So he was reelected in June, this past June, with 92% of the vote. So he is super popular. So that makes his brother-in-law is the president of Iceland.
Oh my God.
So that's why they met there.
Okay.
It's just beautiful. And just in terms of her, she's a very active first lady, very cool, very progressive. They both wore rainbow bracelets when visiting Mike Pence, just because he has.
Oh man!
So very, very interesting people. Which I just thought that was great because it sounds like something Kaufman would write into his story that this person's sister becomes the first lady of Iceland.
So shrug it off.
Come meet me in Reykjavik. So they vibe. Now they're in the mix of things. Now they got to make this thing. What's the creative process like for this, which we often discuss in terms of adaptations? Charlie and Netflix are both open to Reid being a part of the process, and he's a co-producer. But I think this reminded me a lot of Jojo Rabbit. The fact that he said he didn't want to get in the way and make demands, or even like Ron Chernow with Hamilton. He was like, I just want to be more of a consultant because according to him, quote, he said maybe they'll see something in the story that I don't.
I love that. Yeah. An open eye to it because, and that's what Charlie Kaufman wants is what did you derive from it? Because that says so much more about you than anything that just spoon-fed to you.
Yeah.
If you're willing to go there.
And it's like, if you're signing on Charlie Kaufman, you have to know it's not going to be what you made.
Yeah.
Iain Reid had said, quote, there's a cliche that the book is always better, which is silly. They're two different mediums and they're inherently different things. The more different they are, the better it can be for the book and the movie.
Amen.
Now with this Charlie Kaufman thing, people are going back, like the book is a companion piece to the film because it's so abstract. People are like, well, what happens in the book that he's trying to get across? So it actually helps each if you're trying to figure out what's going on with it.
I was definitely getting that sense right up before we got on. Because I had just freshly watched it, and then you gave me kind of a once over on what, and I went, oh yeah, okay, yeah, adds up, check. I could see how it could be a really fun guide actually to take the book back, watch the film if you're interested in how these kinds of things work, if you're interested in what this looks like and how things are adapted. Right now I'm in the middle of listening to Jurassic Park and I've almost forgotten that was a novel first,
Right.
So I'm seeing how did they go about the pieces and what pieces did they keep? How did they change the pieces and reappropriate them for the medium? And how did that benefit the story in each? Yeah. I love doing that. And that's partly why we do this show. So but this seems like a really, really fun one. I think that could be super engaging if you're interested in this, to really sit down with the book and the movie together and walk through and piece the things together. It's such a Russian doll. That sounds like a fun time, actually.
As far as the production itself, unfortunately with Charlie Kaufman, it's always a struggle. So it's 30 days that they gave him, and then it ended up being reduced down. So it was only 24 days to shoot.
What in the world?
Pretty short. And so they were in the car for about 5 of those days because a lot of the movie takes place in the car. So it's almost like a play, but he was like, it was just frantic and hellacious. Yeah. So our last bit is, why is this important as a movie or as a book or some of these things? And I think first of all, it's interesting that they both start with a comedic light edge, both Iain Reid and Charlie Kaufman, but their themes they're working on are a lot of the same things. And also that they both never thought of this as a twist ending, like a psychological thriller, even though I would say both of them are probably marketed that way.
Right. You have to fit it in some sort of box. That's the predicament, is like, well, how do you market something like this? You have to kind of make it feel like a thing you recognize as an audience member. Okay, that's a scary movie to a degree, you know, and that's just a tough call a lot of the time. So I'm glad I didn't see too much press about this. I don't know exactly how you would market this other than maybe the obvious leaning on the paranoia, edging up on psychological thriller, but not really.
Yeah. You kind of just have to say it's Charlie Kaufman and be like, well, I know kind of what I'm getting into, but the point is to not know what you're getting into.
Right.
And then the last bit, I would say probably the most important thing of it is, if only because you like people that are pushing the bounds of what's commercially viable within a system. The fact that Iain Reid's book became super popular, and it's like, well, this is almost it's a 200-page little micro movie, existential, maybe scary story. And then Charlie Kaufman's thing is on Netflix. And it's
I don't understand how, with all of his success, I mean, the clear track, I mean, why in the world is somebody like him having to put up with, I mean, 30 days is already a bit short.
Right.
Why is somebody of his caliber, of his status, dealing with that type of deal?
Because maybe his stuff doesn't make money. And that's he's saying with Netflix. It's like, I don't care. Nobody cares how much people can watch it 5 times. I mean, that's the beauty of a lot of his stuff. It's like, well, I want to watch that again to see what I missed.
Absolutely.
And with Netflix,
it's so thick. It's so layered. Again, going back, I love the idea of having the book along as a companion piece almost, which is so interesting to me, coming from somebody who, with adaptation, basically said, I don't want to do adaptation. Here he is doing a really well thought out, fresh take on adaptation.
And a lot of the lines are lifted word for word, and a lot going through it, it is very, very similar.
I just have the utmost respect for, trying to keep this engaging, because you could take a lot of the same set pieces and actors and all of this design that went into this film and tell a kind of linear movie that honestly ends up, it was all a dream. So, and it would be dissatisfying to plainly put it out there. Here's just some random voiceover at no time in particular. That's what he brings to these types of things, really having you on the edge of your seat trying to, what does this shot mean? And it's not that it's devoid of meaning, it is evocative, whatever the image is. I don't even know how he does it. He can make the mundane just feel like a Rubik's Cube. For real. Not that there's anything exactly to solve, but what is it supposed to be what is supposed to be drudging up out of you? I love that type of thing when you can turn away from a movie and go and really have a discussion. What did you think? What was this to you? And nobody's wrong. This is A+ this is A grade stuff. I can't imagine why he is dealing with 6 less days. It doesn't make money, but good Lord.
I just wanted to bring up one last little thing if you're into this. So we were wondering what happened in those 5 years that Charlie Kaufman wasn't doing anything or not making a film.
Quote, not doing anything.
Right.
Around.
No. Well, so he wrote a book. It just came out this year also.
Really?
It's called Antkind. It's 720 pages. It's this massive. He was like, I want to make something that would be impossible to make into a movie. So,
oh my God, is that the thesis of it? It's like, I'm going to make this, and you can't make this into...
And then Iain Reid has a second novel that came out in 2018, and it's called Foe, and it's more of a sci-fi thing. Very similar, rural confusion, tension, existential dread, that kind of thing. And the reason there's a sci-fi element to it is because, so his sister is the First Lady of Iceland. His brother is a rocket scientist who works at Mission Control in Houston. And every time they would see anything sci-fi, his brother would be like, well, that isn't how it would happen. Or you couldn't do that or this or that. So he's just like, well, you tell me what, and used him as a resource.
What do you want to see in him?
In a book. So he wrote that. It's it actually is also bought, and Iain Reid is working on the screenplay as well, as opposed to just producing it, sitting on the sidelines. Produced by the company that did such things that we've talked about before: Defending Jacob, Catch-22, Electric Dreams, The Laundromat, and then also was involved in Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. So hopefully that'll be in good hands as well as a
I could definitely be up for if this is more psychological thriller tinged. We wouldn't say put it in that box, but if it's going up an alley, maybe it's that one. I would love to see him in the sci-fi realm. That would be really fantastic.
Yeah, as well.
Beautiful. Well, there we have it. That was I'm Thinking of Ending Things. Thank you, Taylor.
Thank you, Evan.
Get in touch with us at IlliteratePod on Instagram. Next week, we're going to be doing another audience choice, so get your suggestions in at IlliteratePod on Instagram. You never know. We're always looking for audience suggestions for episodes, so it could be yours. Thank you so much, and we will catch you next week.